simply reach out. Business structuring is a crucial aspect of your business for the following reasons. It has an impact on the ownership style, management flexibility, taxation, asset protection, and the way that your business is going to resolve issues internally should they ever arise. Let's first cover the various business structures that you can choose from. It's likely that you've already chosen one, but moving forward when you start new businesses or maybe you want to restructure, it can be super important to keep this information in mind. The sole proprietorship is the simplest and most common form of business structure. It is owned and operated by one person who assumes all of the risk, both for the liabilities and for the debts of the business. It requires minimal paperwork, so it's very easy to set up. And if you did absolutely nothing but go into business, this is the default business structure that you're going to operate with. However, keep in mind that while it's very easy to set up, the business owner is going to be personally liable for all debts and obligations of the business. This means that any debts or judgments that are obtained against the business will be collectible against the business owner's personal assets. This includes their home, their cars, their stock accounts, cash, bank accounts, any asset that you can possibly think of that is not already protected by an LLC, corporation, or a trust. AKA, these assets are personally held, hence the term personal liability. A partnership acts similarly to a sole proprietorship in the sense that it's the default mode and you don't need to file any paperwork when you have two or more partners present in the business. Again, it doesn't require any specific paperwork to be filed with the state, any specific agreements, and it's the default mode when two or more people come together to do business. Makes it very easy to set up like the sole proprietorship, but again, the downside, like the sole proprietorship, is that there's no personal liability protection for the partners in the business. This means that any debt or liability of the business can be personally attached to the partners or owners of the business, regardless of whether they actually caused that debt or liability. So if partner one, acting on behalf of the business, causes an issue, a debt, or a liability that's attached to the business, the other partner, who technically was not at fault, will still be on the hook, and the judgment owner will be able to personally collect against that non-at-fault partner's assets. A limited liability company, or an LLC, is a hybrid structure that takes the flexibility of the sole proprietorship and the partnership and combines it with the personal asset protections of a corporation. The LLC is also a flow-through entity when it comes to taxation, if you choose so. This basically means that any profits and losses in the LLC will automatically be passed over to the owner. So it makes it a little easy when it comes tax time, easier than if you had been a corporation or an S corporation. So if it's a partnership, that means that all the profits and losses of the LLC will pass to the partners in direct proportion to their membership interests in the business, unless stated otherwise in the operating agreement. And without getting ahead or getting outside the scope of this video, if you want to be more flexible with the distributions of profits and losses in an LLC, you have to make sure that you adhere to what's called the economic reality test, which is a test imposed by the IRS. Also, for tax purposes, when it comes to an LLC, keep in mind that if you're a sole member LLC, you have a few options. You can elect to be a disregarded entity, an S corporation, or a C corporation. And if you're a multi-member LLC, for tax purposes, you have the option to either be a partnership, a corporation, or an S corporation. But regardless of what you choose, if you're operating under the LLC, you will have those personal liability protections that the sole proprietorship and the partnership did not have available. Just keep in mind that when you want to start an LLC, you do actually have to file paperwork, and there are some administrative tasks that you need to be aware of, such as remaining compliant with the business, following procedures, having an operating agreement, keeping separate bank accounts. So what that means essentially is that the limited liability protections of an LLC are not automatic just because you started an LLC. You actually have to treat it as a separate legal entity from yourself in order to receive those personal liability benefits. Okay, now a corporation, the last business structure that we're going to talk about here, is a separate legal entity that is separated from the shareholders who are the actual owners of the business. And now a corporation offers the maximum amount of liability protections for its shareholders, and the reason why is because it is so strictly kept separate from the shareholders itself. So strict even that when it comes to tax time, like we said with the LLC, how the profits and losses flow through, when it comes to a corporation, it's taxed at 2 levels. Once on the profits and losses of the corporation, and then again with the shareholders once they've received their dividends. The corporation also can be quite burdensome for its owners because there are a lot of formalities and paperwork issues that they do need to follow. This includes having a board of directors, holding annual shareholder meetings, keeping bylaws, minutes, and all records that have to do with company business. Whereas the LLC, the partnership, and the sole proprietorship, as we discussed, has a far more flexible management structure, which can definitely be beneficial for a small business and a business that wants to be more informally ran and held. But with that being said, the corporation can be great for these larger enterprises that want to keep a lot of strict record-keeping requirements, essentially running a tight ship and, not having any issues, because there are some issues when it comes to running the business inflexibly as well. If you own multiple businesses or multiple assets, you can use these different business structures like corporations and LLCs to implement a more complicated asset protection strategy. And when you do own multiple assets, you likely don't just have one LLC or one corporation. You have multiple that feed into each other. And I'll explain an instance of how you can do this. The one asset protection strategy that I like to employ with my clients is one where there is a holding company or a holding entity that takes an ownership or a controlling interest, at least, in the subsidiary LLCs. And in those subsidiary LLCs are where the actual individual assets are held. So you could have holding company at the top and then business 1, business 2, business 3, all held in separate LLCs. And this really goes a long way when it comes to helping out with the limited liability protections and just overall forming this asset protection plan for a person who has multiple businesses and multiple assets. Because when someone obtains a judgment against one business, they cannot collect against the various LLCs and certainly not the holding company. One thing that I also want to point out about these various entities is that you should have a legal document that describes how the internal affairs of the business are going to be governed. So with a partnership, that would be a partnership agreement. With an LLC, this is called an operating agreement. And with a corporation, this document is called the bylaws. These agreements can vary depending on how many owners are in the business, what the percentage is that they actually own in that business, and how you want the business to be ran from a governing structure. So do you want decisions to be made unanimously, or do you want decisions to be made based on the majority interest holders? Now, with all that being said about business structuring, while my intention here is that you're able to grasp all these concepts, if you have any questions which may naturally arise during the course of a video like this, please feel free to reach out. Let's connect, and I'd be more than happy to answer all of your questions. You can reach me either by email at sebastian@founderscouncil.com, or you can even feel free to send me a text to my cell at 201-314-9991. And that's probably the easiest way to reach me, and I'll get back to you the quickest.